Well, they did it. It's official. New York voted today to enact the flavor ban. They had probably 24 people throughout the 4 or 5 different locations in New York where they had the health department meeting, and they coordinated, through webcams. They had a lot of people speak, and they really didn't seem to care. There was 2 votes. One, that they all voted, mainly doctors, yes to enact this flavor ban of everything other than tobacco and menthol juice of any kind, pods or bottles of juice. Then the second vote was whether or not to make it an emergency, where it has to be done in 2 weeks that it takes effect. And all but 2 people voted yes to that. So there you go. I don't know if there's any legal repercussions at this point. I'm sure there will be lawsuits because at this point they will be putting basically stores out of business. Think about any brick and mortar store that has a wall full of juice behind them, and now they got to pull probably everything off, because if only tobacco and menthol, most places don't have menthol e-juice. And tobacco, they may have, but it's not as popular, normally in a retail market like that, so they may not even have tobacco, in which case they have to pull everything off the shelves there. So there you go. Basically, they enacted it, and my understanding is 2 weeks from now, roughly, I think October 4th is when they start enforcement, where they can walk into a store, and if you have it on there, you're getting a ton of fines. So there you go. I don't know about, I guess, even stores that are in New York, websites that sell e-juice that are based in New York, and there are quite a lot of them. My Vapor store, a lot of other places probably can't sell even outside the state. I don't think they're allowed to sell from inside the state. So there we go. I'm in New York, and I'm going to give it a couple of days, and then I'm going to be stocking up on stuff and building up my DIY stuff again, because that's the only way to do it now. Like I said, I'm sure there'll be lawsuits. Who knows if a judge will say, well, this has to be delayed until the lawsuit is settled, or a judge may say, nope, sorry, this is allowed to go through. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. But that's where we're at right now. What I'll do is I'll put some video at the end of this, just at the part where the votes start. And I'll just put the votes in there because it was hours long, the whole thing. So I'll stick that in there for anybody that's interested in just hearing them say yes. And there was a couple of questions during the second part about whether it should be emergency. But in the end, they passed it. So that's where we're at now. There's always a chance. I'm sure there'll be lawsuits. I'm sure there's a chance that this can get overturned. It wouldn't be the first time that the horrible Governor Cuomo here in New York, who's, people say president's an egomaniac. This governor's an egomaniac. He just built a bridge. We have what was called the Tappan Zee Bridge, which is a Native American term, a very old bridge. They rebuilt the whole bridge for billions of dollars, and he named it after his father. All right, his father was a governor here many years ago. So he named the bridge after his father and took away the name Tappan Zee, which has probably been there for 100 years. So he's a real egomaniac, and it wouldn't be the first time that he's tried to do stuff that later on was found not to be legal and was overturned. He did that with a previous juice ban that he was trying to do, which is why now he did it under executive order. He did that with certain gun regulations, where he just threw these regulations up there and they were deemed not to be legal, and probably other things that I'm not familiar with. So if you're interested in watching the end of the vote, that's coming up now. And if I learn anything new, I'll let you know.
Any further questions? If not, I call the vote. Committee members, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? The motion passes. This calls to an end of the committee meeting.
You're all murderers.
Mr. Cross.
All of you murderers.
Where was this when I was a kid, so I didn't have
Okay, the Codes Committee has now concluded. I'm now going to call to order a special Public Health and Health Planning Council meeting of September 17th, 2009. I'm Jeff Crowd, and I'm now calling to order the meeting of the Special Public Health and Health Planning Council, welcoming members, Commissioner Zucker, participants, and observers. At today's meeting, we're going to call for Dr. Gutierrez is going to present regulations for emergency adoption and information. I introduce Dr. Gutierrez to give the report on the Codes, Regulation, and Legislation Committee. Dr. Gutierrez.
Thank you very much. At today's meeting of the Committee on Codes, Regulation, and Legislation, the committee reviewed one proposal for emergency adoption. For emergency adoption is proposed addition to subpart 9-3 to Title 10 NYCRR prohibition on the sale of electronic liquids with characterizing flavors. The committee voted to recommend emergency adoption to the full council, and I so move.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Dr. Watkins seconds.
Dr. Watkins, second. Any questions from any member of the council? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. You have a question, Dr. Martin?
Will we be allowed to make a statement? Why? Yeah, I'd like to discuss. I don't have a question. I don't know what your plans were.
We're going to call the votes, but if you have an issue you'd like to
Well, I would
discuss,
just like to
now is
discuss
the
the
now
vote,
is
yeah.
the time.
No, I don't plan on voting for this, and I'll explain my reasons, and hopefully...
You just hold it a little closer.
And
Go
hopefully
ahead.
others might agree. I mean, I have various concerns. One is, I'm sorry, I'm just not convinced that this is an emergency. In the true sense of an emergency, I do think it's an extraordinarily important public health issue, and it's one that definitely needs to be addressed. And the state has been addressing it. There's absolutely no doubt about it. What I'm concerned about, though, is the uncertainty that has been brought up by the testimony. This is basically going to be a big public health experiment. It seems to me likely unintended consequences will be the probable destruction of this, I guess industry is as good a term as any, during the 3-month period. There doesn't seem to be any cure or anything. There's a whole question of inventory and the like that'll get kicked in also, as probably we're going to eat the stuff they bought. And I don't think that's been addressed. I think there are lots of solutions that are here that have been raised, and I think that it makes more sense to me to try to study them and come up with a more comprehensive solution rather than to go after this low-hanging fruit at the moment, because I'm afraid of unintended consequences that will occur. I'm afraid of what will occur with adults who apparently think that it's helpful. I mean, I have no particular expertise in this. I think there's evidence that we have not seen. It may not exist, but I'd feel much more comfortable if there was a more thorough evaluation of this before we go on.
Before I turn it back to the department, any other member wishes to make a comment? Yes. Yeah.
I share some of Dr. Martin's concerns. I'm having some questions about the implementation process, so I'm wondering if the Department of Health would entertain some registrations or some submissions of exceptions to the rule from establishments that have the ability to have enhanced ID, whatever we can do so that we can provide evidence that people who are buying it are 18 and 21. So within the 90-day, we're not putting people out of work, but we're trying to get rid of establishments that don't have the ability to only serve adults. Do you understand, like what I'm asking? Like would the department take those registrations?
And I have one other question before you respond, Dr. Brown.
My name is Lawrence Brown, and I am an addiction medicine specialist. So when I've heard the testimony, I must confess that much of it did move me. I must appreciate that. I treat about 2,800 adults and 300 adolescents. In that respect, the concern about the future of the citizens of the state, particularly adolescents, is particularly challenging for me. I do recognize that there's no perfection here with respect to all the data that supports a particular approach, but there's no question about the addictive potential and the effect of nicotine. I am really concerned that even with vaping, that we are actually forecasting some nicotine-related consequences in the future, even for our adults. And to, in fact, put that on adolescents, I'm particularly concerned about. I do appreciate the issue that children will be engaged in activities that we as adults, at least most of us, would hope that they would not do. But the reality is that from the data that I've seen from the Department of Health, it is persuasive to me that suggests that a lot of this is driven by making it attractive to children. I concur with many of my comments of the comments of my colleague, Dr. Martin, but I am somewhat challenged with the fact that, number one, I would appreciate if the state would add menthol as one of the flavors, because I do believe that's really helpful. If they can't do that, quite frankly, I must confess that this has always been, public health has always been a process of slow progress, so that you get steps accomplished as you can, and you hope that within this 90 days that the Department of Health would provide some data to support further the continuation of this emergency regulations. So in this, I must confess, I'm kind of torn, but I quite frankly, because of the fact that adolescents are at risk here, from what I can see and what I can hear, I'm a bit concerned about doing nothing.
Brown. Mr. Lawrence.
I too am torn, but I am concerned about the fact that the adolescents are being targeted or have been targeted. I'm also concerned that the menthol has not been included, especially given the history of menthol and the marketing of menthol to African Americans and adults as well as to African American youth. So I think menthol should be included with this 90-day emergency legislation. Thank you.
Brad, I'll turn it back to you to respond, and what you're hearing from some of the members, and I'll agree with Mr. Lawrence and Dr. Brown, is directing the department to consider including menthol in this in the interim period that we are going to have to re-adopt these regulations to have them amended. So let me turn it back to you if you can respond to the issues that were just raised by Dr. Martin and the others.
Sure. This is Howard Zucker.
Sorry.
With regards to Dr. Ortiz's question, we will entertain different possibilities as we move forward, but right now we're not going to make any changes at this point. Regarding the menthol question, the governor asked that we look at that and to report back to him within a 2-week period. And so I've heard what the individuals here have spoken to us about, and we'll work on that to give a report back to the governor. And overall, the governor has asked this committee to be convened to address the ban on the flavored e-cigarettes as it is at this point. Thank you.
Dr. Berliner.
Dr. Zucker, I don't understand. If you report...
Howard, speaking to the mic. Don't look at him.
I don't understand. If you have to give a report on the menthol to the governor in 2 weeks, but the emergency regulation has passed, what happens if...
Gets amended.
Then what happens?
Well, remember, this is 90 days. If it is necessary to reconvene FIPIC to add menthol, we can do that. But at this point, given the emergency situation that we view, what's happening to adolescents at this time, the flavored cigarettes, with the exception of menthol, should be comes up for the vote at this point. But I wanted to hear from the FIPIC committee as well as others, and to get more information about the menthol, the challenges regarding menthol, and we'll provide that back to the governor.
Okay. If Dr. Brown, do you want to say something? And then if there's anybody else in Rochester, Albany, or Buffalo that wants to speak, if not, I'm going to call a vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just would like to add, and Commissioner, one of the things that we have as a challenge in treating persons with opiate use disorders is the co-occurring other disorders, one of which is, in fact, nicotine. So if it would be quite useful to be able to have a report about this as quickly as we can, because it does give a sense that we are making this journey somewhat halfway when we are not including the issue about menthol that is really a driver for continued use of tobacco products, certainly for those who already have a co-occurring addiction to opiates.
Thank you, Dr. Brown.
The comments, and I do want to add that that there is a concern that we do have, as you had mentioned, that there is a nicotine addiction that is occurring in children who are being exposed or using these vaping products, and this is part of what this emergency is all about. But I hear you, and I will take that message back and address it.
Okay, is there any other member of the council wishes to be heard? Hearing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? Aye. Aye. Okay, all those opposed?
Nay.
Dr. Martin, Dr. Berliner is a nay. Any abstentions? The motion carries. This concludes the...
This is blood money at work. This is disgusting. You should be ashamed to call yourself health professionals.
This is the full meeting of the Public Health and Health Planning Council is now adjourned. The next committee day will be held on September 26th, and the full council meeting will convene on October 10th in New York City. We are adjourned.